2:52 in the morning. My phone vibrated exactly once. Short. Sharp. The kind of alert that never happens by accident. On the infrared security feed, a figure was crouched close to the door of my underground food cellar, a flashlight tucked under one arm, a light-colored leather purse hanging loosely from her shoulder, and in her hand, a pair of bolt cutters, pressed tight against the padlock like she had practiced the motion dozens of times. Metal grinding against metal. No hesitation. No trembling. That woman knew exactly what she was doing. I did not rush outside. I did not shout. I did not call the neighbors. I stayed seated in the kitchen, one hand resting on a cup of coffee that had gone cold long ago, watching her cut the lock and pull the cellar door open. When the wooden door made a soft click, I knew the game had entered its final round. My name is Ethan Harper. The people close to me call me Eli. I am 54 years old, a former Army serviceman. My back was permanently damaged in a training accident more than 10 years ago, an injury that ended my career and forced me to relearn how to live slowly. I live in Hawthorne Crest, a newly built subdivision on the outskirts of Asheville. The houses here look so identical that if you drive a little too fast, you will not know which turn you took. Except for my land. These 2.7 acres have belonged to my family since my great-grandfather's time. When developers came knocking 15 years ago, they waved glossy checks and polite smiles. Most of my neighbors sold. I did not. I held on to the land the way you hold on to an old oath. And in the middle of the neat, perfectly aligned HOA neighborhood, my property sits there, stubborn and silent. 2 years ago, after my back could no longer handle climbing ladders or hauling lumber like it used to, I dug and built an underground food cellar with my own hands. A proper root cellar. A ramp for carts. Ventilation. Temperature sensors. It took 8 months, working in 15-minute intervals before stopping from the pain. Inside are pickled vegetables, smoked meat, canned goods, the smell of cool earth, rubber jar seals, and a very real sense of security. It is not just a cellar. It is freedom. And it is also the reason she entered my life. Vanessa Langford, 46 years old. HOA president of Hawthorne Crest for 5 consecutive years. Real estate agent. Luxury car. High heels. A clipboard always held tight to her chest like a scepter. Her husband, Grant Langford, used to be a county board member. A detail she mentioned often enough for you to understand it was no coincidence. The first time Vanessa came to see me was on a Tuesday morning. She stood outside my fence, staring straight at the cellar door, as if it had personally insulted her mother. She handed me a violation notice, an unsuitable agricultural structure, lowering neighborhood property values, a fine, an order to remove it within 30 days. I read it carefully. Then I read it again. I told her the cellar had been built before the HOA was officially established. Under the law, it was grandfathered in. Vanessa smiled, a thin, sharp smile, cold enough to send a chill down my spine. Community standards have changed, Mr. Harper. We are elevating this neighborhood. I am sure someone with your background understands the importance of compliance. The way she said the word background told me exactly which box she had placed me in. Veteran. Disabled. Living slowly. Easy to pressure. But she misjudged the one thing you should never underestimate in someone who once wore a uniform. We do not react recklessly. We document. We prepare. And we wait for the right moment. Over the next 6 months, the fines arrived like clockwork. Grass higher than the limit by 1/10 of an inch. Trash bins slightly out of place. A garden hose visible from the street. Violations so minor you would never notice unless you were actively looking. But what caught my attention was not the money. It was the way Vanessa walked the fence line, photographing the lock, measuring the distance from the cellar to the road, standing for long moments, studying wind direction and the tree cover. She was not measuring grass. She was measuring angles and access. And then, this morning, at 2:52 in the morning, she decided paperwork was no longer necessary. On the screen, I watched Vanessa step down each wooden stair, her expensive shoes touching my worn steps. The flashlight swept across neatly stacked rows of glass jars. I opened an app on my phone. A simple interface. A single button. When I tapped the screen, the steel bolts hidden inside the cellar door frame slid into place with a soft click. So quiet, the person below could not hear it. I took a sip of cold coffee, sat quietly in the kitchen, and for the first time in half a year, I smiled. If she wanted to see what was under my cellar, she was going to have plenty of time to think about it. The first violation notice landed in my hand like a dry slap in the middle of a quiet morning. The ink was still fresh, the paper edges sharp, the faint smell of an office clinging to my fingertips. Unsightly agricultural structure. The phrase sat at the top of the page in bold, heavy letters, like a verdict already written. I stood by the fence, early sunlight cutting through the tree branches, while the woman facing me smiled with the practiced patience of someone used to giving orders. Vanessa Langford did not need to raise her voice. She did not need to threaten me. She simply stood there, her clipboard pressed to her chest, her lips curved just enough. I noticed her wedding ring, large enough to catch the light like a cold, watchful eye. She lifted her hand and pointed toward my cellar door, as if that single gesture could turn something I built with sweat and pain into trash. 30 days to remove it. Fines if I failed to comply. Community standards. Neighborhood property values. I read it slowly, very slowly. In my mind, each word was weighed. The cellar was built before the HOA even existed. It was grandfathered in under the law. I said that calmly, not loud, not quiet. A part of me was already familiar with conversations like this. A disabled veteran living on benefits was not an image that made people cautious. Vanessa tilted her head. Her smile sharpened, thin as a newly honed blade. Standards change, Mr. Harper. We are elevating Hawthorne Crest. I am sure someone with your background understands the importance of compliance. Background. She said the word, the way you talk about a crack in a wall. I saw her eyes flick briefly toward my back, pausing for just a moment, as if she had heard something about an old injury. Only a second, but enough for me to know she had done her homework. When Vanessa walked away, the scent of her expensive perfume lingered in the air, heavy and out of place among the smell of damp soil and leaves. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the paper in my hand, then folded it carefully. I did not tear it up. I did not throw it away. I placed it in a drawer with the things that mattered. The following week, the second notice arrived faster. Grass too tall by 1/10 of an inch. I looked at my lawn, evenly green, trimmed better than half the neighborhood. I did not argue. I documented it. Date. Time. Signature. The week after that, another notice. Trash bins slightly out of position. Then a visible garden hose. Violations so small you would never see them unless you were deliberately searching. But Vanessa saw them. She saw everything. And every time she appeared, she lingered a little longer in front of my cellar door. Not to admire it, to measure it. I began to recognize the rhythm. Each time I fixed one issue, another appeared. The fines were not large, but they were constant, like small cuts that do not kill you outright. They just wear you down, drain your patience, and wait for you to quit. One afternoon, while I was wiping down the handrail on the cellar ramp, I saw Vanessa walking along the fence line. She did not call out to me. She did not speak. She walked, stopped, wrote notes. Her phone came up. Taking pictures of the lock, pictures of the ventilation opening, pictures of the sight line from the main road to the cellar entrance. She stood for a long time beneath the old oak tree, where the canopy partially hid the door. That was when I understood this was no longer about grass or trash bins. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, my back aching dully, an old notebook from my army days in my hand. I wrote everything down. Not because I liked paperwork, because I knew paperwork was the only thing people like Vanessa truly respected. I remembered something an instructor once told me when I was young. Never assume the other side is stupid. Assume they are playing a different game. The next day, a neighbor stopped by. Colleen Park, a widow who had lived here before this place even had a name. She looked at the stack of papers on my table, then out the window toward the cellar. She did not ask many questions. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper. You know, when people want your land, they always start by making you look like the problem. That night, I called Diesel Navarro, an old friend I had served with. I did not tell him everything. I just said that someone was watching my cellar in a way that did not feel right. Diesel was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Then it is time you let them see what you want them to see." I pinned the latest violation notice to the wooden board in my kitchen. Beside it were the earlier ones, lined up neatly like a chain of evidence. Vanessa thought I was a tired man with a bad back, living slowly, easy to push aside with a few pieces of paper. She did not know that the more underestimated some people are, the more familiar they become with waiting. And I had begun to wait. The sound of a pickup truck engine rolled up to my gate before 9 in the morning, and by instinct alone, I knew this had moved beyond ordinary annoyance. The truck with the county logo crunched to a stop on the gravel driveway. 2 men stepped out. One wore a white hard hat and carried a clipboard identical to Vanessa's. The other held a large camera with a long lens, his eyes cold and focused, like he was standing at a crime scene. I stood on the porch, coffee still steaming in my hand, my back stiff from the morning pain, and waited for the line I already knew was coming. "We received a complaint regarding unpermitted construction," the man in the hard hat said, his voice flat, like he was reading from a script. He did not need to look toward the cellar door. I already knew what they were here for. I asked his name. He answered and showed me a plastic badge. County Building Inspector. Complaint-driven inspection. No advance notice required. The man with the camera had already started working. He did not take wide shots. He photographed details. The sightline from the road to the cellar door. The distance between the cellar and the fence. The height of the handrail. The position of the lock. There were no questions about safety. Not once did he ask about load-bearing structure or ventilation. Everything was about position and visibility. I saw it clearly, and in my mind, a missing piece slid perfectly into place. I told them I needed formal paperwork before granting access to the cellar. I asked for a warrant. The man in the hard hat flushed red. He said we could do this the easy way or the hard way. I replied, still calm, that I was doing my job, protecting my property. They left in less than 20 minutes. But before they did, the man with the camera made another slow pass, snapping photos like he was afraid to miss a single detail. That afternoon, I drove to the county administrative center. An old building, the smell of paper, and overworked air conditioning. I asked to review public records. The clerk looked at me, her eyes briefly flicking to the cane I carried, then handed me a stack of documents. Inside was something Vanessa had never mentioned while standing at my fence. A zoning adjustment application. Langford Development Group. A mixed-use project. Residential, commercial, parking structures. The outlined area included my land, highlighted in a thick red border without mercy. I read slowly, very slowly, and felt a cold sensation run down my spine. All the fines, all the measurements. That fake inspection this morning. Not to teach me compliance. To prepare for a takeover. When I got home, the sun was already dropping low. Vanessa stood across the street, pretending to talk on her phone, but her eyes never left the cellar door. I did not look back. I had seen enough. 2 days later, the power company showed up. A young technician, exhaustion on his face, read from a tablet about a safety complaint involving underground electrical wiring. I led him outside, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder of old permits. He flipped through the pages, then let out a quiet breath of relief. Everything was fully approved. He apologized for the inconvenience, but I noted the timing. The complaint had been filed less than 1 hour after I refused the HOA's latest survey request. The following day, public health arrived. The reason was unsafe food storage. The inspector stepped down into the cellar, her flashlight sweeping over neatly labeled rows of jars. Her expression shifted from suspicion to surprise. Stable temperature, proper ventilation, no violations. When I asked about the timing of the complaint, she hesitated, then showed me the screen. The timestamp matched Vanessa's schedule perfectly. That evening, I spread everything across the kitchen table. Violation notices, photographs, inspection reports, timestamps. Each page was a piece of a much larger picture. I no longer felt randomly harassed. I was being hunted. Colleen Park stopped by, carrying a bag of homemade cookies. She looked at the stack of documents, then at me. There was no pity in her eyes. Only confirmation. "They are testing how long you can hold out," she said. "When you get tired, you sell. When you do not sell, they make you look like the problem that needs fixing." That night, I called Diesel Navarro. I told him about the zoning application, about the inspections coming one after another. Diesel was quiet for a long time, then gave a dry laugh. So it was never about grass or trash bins. It was about the land. I sat in the kitchen with most of the lights off, only the glow from the window falling across the wooden board where I pinned the violation notices. I added a copy of the development application, clipped neatly, out in the open. Vanessa thought I was just a former soldier with a bad back, living slowly, easily pushed around with paperwork. She did not know that in the army, I once did a job where the only mission was to read the enemy, identify the real objective, and wait for the exact moment. The game had revealed its true face. And once the hunter steps into the light, the prey is no longer prey. The doorbell rang 3 short, decisive times, like a command already stamped and approved. When I opened the door, the man standing there was not holding an HOA clipboard. He wore a county badge, a light blue shirt, a belt heavy with keys, the tired eyes of someone used to being sent out to do dirty work. Beside him stood another man, younger, a large camera slung over his shoulder. A long, cold lens pointed straight toward my yard. "We received a report regarding an electrical safety hazard," the man said, his voice flat as concrete. "We need to inspect immediately." I glanced toward the end of the street. Vanessa's silver luxury car was parked beneath the shade of a tree. She did not step out. She did not need to. She had sent others to do it for her. I led them in. No arguments. No long explanations. I opened the electrical cabinet and laid each folder of documents out on the wooden table on the porch. Old permits, approved diagrams, photographs from the installation years ago. The younger technician flipped through every page, sweat forming at his temples. Everything was valid. He nodded and offered a quiet apology. The man with the camera was different. He did not photograph the wiring. He photographed the distance from the electrical cabinet to the cellar door, the walkway, the fence. I looked straight into the lens. He looked away. Less than an hour after they left, I received another call. Public health. A report about unsafe food storage. I stood in the kitchen, my hand resting on the cold countertop, and laughed. A silent laugh. The sequence was far too smooth to be coincidence. The health inspector stepped down into the cellar with me. Her flashlight swept across neatly labeled rows of jars, a thermometer hanging straight, ventilation fans humming softly. She lingered longer than necessary, not out of suspicion, but out of surprise. "This is one of the best home storage systems I have ever seen," she said honestly. "There are no violations." I asked about the timing of the complaint. She hesitated, then showed me the screen. The timestamp was clear. nearly identical to the moment I had refused the HOA's latest survey request. After she left, I stood alone in the cellar, breathing in the familiar cool scent of earth, and understood that the worst part was not the inspections. The worst part was how they were being linked together. Someone was pressing buttons, and every button led to the same target. That evening, Colleen Park knocked on my door. She carried an old envelope, the paper yellowed with age. Inside was a copy of town meeting records from years ago, back when Hawthorne Crest was still farmland. One name was underlined: Langford. She looked at me with the calm eyes of someone who had seen too many cycles repeat. "They do not want you to fix anything," she said. "They want you gone from the map." At the same time, Diesel Navarro called. His voice dropped when I told him about the chain of inspections. He did not ask if I was all right. He asked if I had started logging timestamps yet. I told him I had. He told me to keep going. When trouble turns from nuisance into system, the only thing that beats it is evidence. The next morning, the hardest blow came without anyone knocking. My phone vibrated. The Veterans Benefits Office. The voice on the other end was polite, to the point of being cold. "We have received community concerns regarding the stability of your living situation," they said. "We need to reassess certain benefits." My hand clenched until my knuckles turned white. Not from fear, from rage. Vanessa had crossed beyond fines and paperwork. She had touched the thing that kept a roof over my head and food on my table. She believed a man, living slowly, with a damaged back, would collapse when threatened with the loss of his last support. I ended the call and dialed attorney Jillian Cross, a woman who had helped more veterans than she could remember. She listened, without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a few seconds, then spoke very slowly. "If they are using false information to target your benefits, this is no longer a neighborhood issue. This is federal." That night, I spread every document across the table. HOA violation notices, inspection reports, timestamps, the call from the benefits office. Each page was a heartbeat from the same ugly body. I no longer felt underestimated. I could see real power revealing itself. Not my power, but the power they believed I would never dare to touch. Vanessa believed I only knew how to endure. She did not know that in the military, I once held a job that required only one thing. When pushed into a corner, you had to know exactly when to shift from defense to counterattack, and that moment had arrived. The neighborhood barbecue began with laughter, but it ended with smoke burning in my throat. The sun sank slowly behind rows of identical houses, orange light spilling across long wooden tables covered with thin paper cloths. Meat sizzled on the grills, soda cans popped open, small talk drifted by as if no one were being hunted at all. I had planned not to go, but Diesel was right. If I disappeared, someone else would tell my story for me. Vanessa arrived late, exactly as she always did. A light-colored dress, a full, practiced smile, a voice loud enough to carry but soft enough not to be called disruptive. She did not stay in one place. She moved, stopped, leaned in, rested a hand on someone's shoulder. Like a politician campaigning for a carefully constructed fear, I stood near the drink table, listening without looking. I heard the phrases she released with surgical precision. Concern, safety, isolation, spending too much time underground, strong reactions to authority. Every sentence lacked a subject, but everyone knew who she was talking about. One neighbor glanced at me, uncertain. Another gave an awkward smile. The seed had been planted. Vanessa was doing what she did best, turning self-reliance into a warning sign, turning a veteran into a problem that needed management. I felt the familiar stab in my lower back, not from my body, but from memory. Years of learning to stand still while being misjudged. Meetings where people talked about you as if you were not in the room. Then Vanessa made a mistake. She walked toward Diesel. Diesel was tall, broad-shouldered, standing still like poured concrete. Vanessa put on her rehearsed look of concern. "Mr. Navarro," she said, "you are the person closest to Ethan here. Surely you have noticed some changes lately." Diesel did not answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether politeness was still deserved. "What kind of changes, ma'am?" he asked, his voice flat. Vanessa tilted her head, lowering her voice into false intimacy. "The obsession with the cellar. The resistance to reasonable standards. Grant has seen cases like this before. Veterans sometimes struggle to adjust. It is not their fault, but it can escalate." The air around the table went still. Diesel let out a dry laugh. Then he spoke slowly, clearly, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "The only thing escalating here is you. And what you are escalating is a development project, not neighborhood safety." Vanessa's smile froze. Just for a heartbeat, but I saw it. Diesel continued, calm and steady. "Langford Development Group. Zoning adjustment applications. Coverage for this entire block. Ethan's land is the only parcel that has not sold. Funny how he suddenly becomes a concern, isn't it?" Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes swept the crowd, searching for something to grab onto. "I do not know what you are implying," she said. Diesel nodded. "I am not implying anything. I am stating facts. Anyone can check public records. The real question is why you are using the HOA to do this." Whispers rose like a shifting wind. Someone murmured a question. Someone else pulled out a phone. Vanessa stepped back half a pace, then quickly straightened. She spoke about misunderstandings, about responsibility, about protecting community values. But the words had lost their weight. The mask had cracked. That night, I drove home in silence. Diesel followed behind me. We did not say much. We did not need to. Some battles are not won with a punch, but by placing the light in exactly the right place. The next morning, I stepped outside and noticed my truck leaning slightly. One tire was flat. Not a natural leak. A clean, precise cut, placed where the air would escape slowly. The kind of cut meant to strand you miles from home, not right away. I stood there for a long time. No shouting, no swearing, just looking. I called the local police. They came, glanced at it, filed a report. "Probably kids," they said. "Happens all the time." After they left, I sat down on the porch steps, my hand resting on the rough wood. I understood the message. Do not challenge. Do not speak loudly. Do not pull back the curtain. My phone vibrated. The Veterans Benefits Office. A request for additional evaluations. The same day. The same rhythm. In that moment, I felt something unexpected. Not fear. Calm. The stillness of someone who has just seen the entire map. Vanessa thought I was weak. Because I lived slowly. She believed power lived in whispers and anonymous calls. She did not know that I had spent my life inside a system where everything is recorded, connected, and brought into the light when enough pieces are in place. That night, I opened my old notebook. I added a new line. Barbecue. Public smear. Confrontation. Property sabotage. Federal call. I underlined the last entry, not out of fear, because I knew that from this point forward, every step she took would leave a footprint, and I was ready to follow. The call came at 6:12 in the morning, before I had taken my first sip of coffee. The voice on the other end was polite to the point of being hollow. The Veterans Benefits Office informed me they had received community concerns regarding my ability to maintain a stable living environment. Certain benefits needed to be reassessed. No threats, no apologies, just a notice, read straight from a script. I set the phone down very slowly. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anger. A cold, deep anger compressed tight in my chest like bent steel. Vanessa was no longer playing with fines and paperwork. She had aimed at my lifeline, at the thing that kept a roof over my head and food on my table when my back no longer allowed me to work the way I once had. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the morning light spill through the window. and understood something with perfect clarity. When someone is willing to use a federal system to squeeze a disabled veteran, they no longer believe they can lose, and that is always their most dangerous moment. I called attorney Jillian Cross. She listened, without interrupting, without sighing. When I finished, she was silent for a few seconds, long enough for me to hear papers turning on her end. Then she spoke, slow and steady. If they are using false information to pressure your benefits, this is discrimination based on disability. And if there is coordination involved, this becomes federal. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground beneath me grow solid again. Jillian told me to do the one thing Vanessa never expected. Do not react emotionally. Do not make angry calls. Document everything. Time. Caller. Content. She reminded me that systems like this hate being abused, and when forced to stare directly at evidence, they respond. That afternoon, I went to the administrative center to file a formal complaint. The hallway was long, lit by cold fluorescent lights, footsteps echoing off the walls. As I stood waiting, I heard a familiar voice drifting out of the planning office at the far end of the corridor. Vanessa. She did not know I was there. She was speaking louder than necessary, with the confidence of someone who believed she was on the winning side. I stood by the water fountain, my back turned, and listened. The project already has committed investors, Vanessa said. More than $14 million waiting. Everything depends on clearing the central parcel, another voice answered. Male, flat, not local. And the landowner, Vanessa laughed. A veteran. Difficult, but manageable. His cellar interferes with drainage plans. If legal options are too slow, accidents happen all the time with underground structures. Leaks, collapses, unfortunate incidents. My blood went cold. I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking slightly, and started recording. Vanessa continued. Everything is already in motion. Inspections, complaints, psychological evaluations. We just need enough documentation to prove he is a risk. Every word landed like a hammer strike. This was no longer suspicion, no longer the feeling of being hunted. This was conspiracy spoken out loud, inside a government building. When the conversation ended, I stood there for a few more seconds, my heart beating slow but heavy. I had what no HOA smile could ever cover. That evening, Diesel came over. I played the recording for him. He did not swear. He did not slam his fist on the table. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then opened them. Now I understand, he said. She does not just want the land. She is willing to destroy you to get it. Jillian listened to the recording over a video call. She did not hide the edge in her voice. This is evidence of conspiracy, she said. Bribery, false reporting, threats to property. If she makes a move, she will put her own head in the noose. I looked down at the table, at the stack of violation notices that once kept me awake at night. They looked smaller than ever. Vanessa thought I was just a man under pressure, someone who would break when his lifeline was touched. She did not know that I was used to being underestimated. In the military, I had done work where my only value was that no one remembered my name until everything was finished. I told Diesel what I was thinking. Not an attack. Not retaliation. Wait. Document. And if she was reckless enough to cross the final line, I would let her prove everything herself. That night, I sat alone in the cellar, my hand resting against the cool earth walls. I no longer saw it as a shelter. I saw it as a fixed point, an anchor. Vanessa believed power was the ability to make calls and scare people. She did not understand that real power is patience, the ability to wait while your opponent exposes themselves. And from that moment on, I was no longer being hunted. I was watching. 3 days after the recording at the administrative building, I woke up with the feeling that someone was standing in my yard. There was no sound, no shadow, just a very old instinct I had learned to trust back when I still wore a uniform. I stepped onto the porch, and looked down the gravel path. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Then I saw it. Fresh tire tracks pressed into the damp soil, stopping at just the right distance from the cellar door. Close enough to observe, far enough to stay out of the front camera's full view. Vanessa was no longer sending other people. She had begun scouting the ground herself. The days that followed moved at a suffocatingly slow rhythm. I worked in the garden, repaired the handrail, wiped down each glass jar in the cellar. On the surface, I looked like a tired man trying to hold on to an old routine. Inside, I was counting hours, logging details, waiting for small signals most people would miss. Diesel arrived on a humid afternoon, carrying a large bag and a serious expression. He did not ask many questions. He said it simply: if she is reckless enough to talk about accidents, she will want to inspect the site herself, and if she inspects it, she will leave traces. We worked quietly. No bright lights, no metal clatter. Small cameras were hidden in tree hollows, beneath wooden steps, in places only someone who had learned how to stay unseen would think to look. Vibration sensors lined the walkway. Directional microphones were aimed straight at the cellar door. Every device sent duplicate data off-site, in case anyone tried to destroy evidence. The most important part was the lock. Diesel explained it slowly, like he was training a new recruit. The exterior lock was just bait. The real restraint lived inside the door frame. Steel bolts that slid smoothly into place. Controlled remotely. No sound. No visible sign. Once engaged, only someone outside could open it. I looked at the old wooden door and understood that Vanessa had stared at it dozens of times without ever seeing this. That evening, I called Jillian. I told her I wanted to prepare for the worst-case scenario. She did not ask why. She only asked whether I had enough documentation. I said I did. She gave me one instruction: do not confront. Do not warn. Let her cross the line on her own. That night, Vanessa called me. Her voice was softer than before, sweet in a way that felt practiced. "Ethan," she said, "I think we have misunderstood each other. Maybe we should talk privately." No paperwork. No tension. She mentioned a buyout offer. A good price. A very good price. She spoke as if she were offering to free me from a burden. I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then I said, calmly, that I needed time to think, that the cellar meant more to me than money, that if she wanted to understand its value, she could see it with her own eyes. On the other end of the line, I heard her breathing change. Greed and curiosity always surface quickly when someone thinks they are about to win. Vanessa agreed. She said she would arrange a time, cooler at night, fewer people around. After the call, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I did not feel nervous. I felt a strange clarity. Everything was in its proper place. Everyone was walking the path they had chosen. The next day, Colleen Park stopped by. She looked at the new camera system and did not ask a single question. She only nodded. As she left, she turned back and said quietly, "People like her always believe they are the smartest person in the room." Saturday night, Diesel returned one last time to check everything. He stood by the cellar door, tapped it lightly, listened to the echo. "Perfect," he said. Then he looked at me, his expression serious. "You all right?" I nodded. I had lived for years being underestimated. I was used to people thinking I was weaker because I spoke less. What they never realized was that in silence, I learned how to observe. And in observation, I learned how to wait. Night fell quickly. No moon. No wind. The camera screens lit up every corner of the yard, sharp enough for me to count individual stones. I sat in the kitchen, my hand resting on my phone, not touching the screen. A car stopped at the end of the street. The lights went off. A door opened. A figure stepped out, crouched low, and slipped into the darkness. Vanessa had arrived. And I knew that from that moment on, Nothing she did would be under her control anymore. The cellar door opened with a soft click, so faint I might have missed it if I had not been watching the screen at that exact moment. A figure slipped through the doorway, crouched low, controlled, like the movement had been rehearsed. The flashlight swept in a short arc, paused precisely at the handrail, then shut off. I recognized the posture immediately, even with the effort to disguise it. Vanessa Langford. No bright dress, no high heels, a dark jacket, hair pulled tight. She had shed her usual shell to do the dirty work herself. I stayed seated in the kitchen, breathing slow and steady. On the monitors, every angle appeared with ruthless clarity. She was not rummaging blindly. She was inspecting, tapping the walls, looking up at the ceiling, running her hand along the wooden shelves. The movements of someone convinced that beneath this soil lay something more valuable than vegetables. From another channel, the microphone caught her breathing, gradually quickening. Not from effort, from excitement. She whispered to herself, "There has to be something here. No one fights this hard just for canned food." I heard every word. The voice of someone who had already convinced herself this act was justified. In that moment, I saw the plot twist she had no idea she was stepping into. She believed I was a weak man clinging to a cellar. She did not know that my real power was not in strength or authority. It was in the fact that I had turned her recklessness into evidence. I remembered the conversation in the administrative building hallway. The cold tone when she spoke about accidents. The light laugh when she believed everything was under her control. I looked at the screen, where she was bent over, pulling open wooden crates, and understood that this moment was one she had created herself. Inside the cellar, Vanessa straightened and took a few steps toward the stairs. She tested the door, gently at first, then harder. It did not move. She froze. I saw her shoulders tense. "What is this?" she said, her voice rising. The microphone captured the shift perfectly. Confidence thinning, doubt creeping in. She slammed the door. Once. Twice. There was no sound of metal giving way, only the dull thud of wood meeting steel. She stepped back. Breathing fast, I rested my hand on my phone, but did not press anything yet. I gave her time. Not out of cruelty. Because the truth needs time to sink in. Vanessa began calling my name. Gone was the practiced warmth. What remained was confusion edged with anger. "Ethan, open the door. This is a misunderstanding." I could hear the panic beating through her breath. I activated the intercom. My voice carried down into the cellar, calm enough to surprise even me. "The police are on their way. You might want to think about how you plan to explain cutting a lock and entering private property at this hour." Silence dropped like a heavy curtain. Then she spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other. "I can cancel everything. The fines, the complaints, all of it. We can forget this happened." I looked at the coffee cup on the table. Cold now. I remembered mornings of back pain, the doubtful looks at the barbecue, the call threatening my benefits. I did not need many words. "It is too late," I said. Down in the cellar, Vanessa began to cry. Not a dramatic wail, a broken, choking sound. The kind that comes when someone realizes for the first time that their power no longer works. She begged. Then she threatened. Then she begged again. A chaotic spiral of emotion, every beat captured by cameras and microphones. Outside, red and blue lights swept across the trees. I stood up and stepped onto the porch. No rush, no shaking. I heard the vehicles stop, doors open, boots on gravel. When the officer asked what happened, I handed over my phone. No explanations, no embellishment. Everything was there. Images, audio, timestamps, a story, telling itself. When I unlocked the door, the cellar opened easily. Vanessa stepped out, pale, clothes smeared with dirt. The smell of canned food and sweat clung to her like a bitter reminder. She shouted about kidnapping, about her husband, about power. The officer looked at the bolt cutters lying at the foot of the stairs, then at the severed lock, then at me. There was no judgment in that look, only conclusion. As the handcuffs closed, I did not feel triumph. I felt calm, the kind of calm that comes when a storm finally breaks itself against stone. Vanessa had entered my cellar looking for power. She came out carrying the truth. And from that moment on, every story she had ever told about me lost its weight. The sound of metal closing around Vanessa's wrists was sharp and final, like a period placed at the end of a sentence that had gone on far too long. She stood beneath the flashing lights of the patrol car, her face drained of color, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape that no longer existed. The last words she threw out were no longer aimed at me. They were aimed at the air. Kidnapping. False imprisonment. My husband will not let this go. Power. Connections. Each word landed lighter than the last, like coins dropped into a dry well. The young officer glanced at the bolt cutters resting at the foot of the stairs. He looked at the severed lock. He looked at the phone in my hand, where timestamps, audio, and video were lined up cleanly. He did not need to ask anything else. No debate was necessary. The story had already told itself. As the car pulled away, I remained alone on the porch. The night wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the damp, earthy scent rising from the cellar. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not victory, relief. The relief of someone who has finally set down a burden that should never have been carried in the first place. But it did not end there. The next morning, Hawthorne Crest woke up to rumors that traveled faster than cold coffee. Neighbors gathered by their mailboxes, whispering, glancing toward my house. Some were curious. Some looked embarrassed for having believed the earlier murmurs. I did not step outside to explain. I did not need to. By midday, my phone vibrated. Jillian. Her voice was focused, precise. We have received the full file from the police, the administrative building recording, the break-in footage, the chain of false complaints. The prosecutor is reviewing multiple angles. That afternoon, another car stopped in front of my house. No siren, no flashing lights. A middle-aged man stepped out, neatly dressed. He introduced himself as legal counsel for Langford Development Group. His tone was smooth, as if trying to put out a fire with warm water. He spoke of misunderstandings, of Vanessa acting alone, of a desire to resolve things quietly. I looked at him, at his clean shoes standing on my worn gravel drive. I said only one sentence. Any further communication should go through my attorney. That was when I saw the real plot twist unfold. His expression shifted, quick and subtle. He realized I was no longer the isolated man they could crush with paperwork. I was someone with records, with evidence, and with time. In the days that followed, the dominoes began to fall. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Vanessa was suspended from her position. An internal investigation was opened. The violation notices sent to me were withdrawn, without apology, just dry administrative messages. Grant Langford appeared in the local news, no longer as a powerful spouse, but as an official questioned about conflicts of interest. He avoided cameras, avoided questions, avoided even the eyes of his neighbors. A week later, Jillian called again. The prosecutor has decided to file charges, not just for trespassing, for conspiracy, for abuse of process, for deliberately targeting a veteran's benefits. She spoke slowly, making sure I understood. The threats Vanessa believed would intimidate me had become evidence. That evening, I sat inside the cellar, warm yellow light casting soft shadows over rows of neatly arranged jars. I rested my hand against the cool earth wall, feeling the familiar chill. I thought about Vanessa, about how she had entered this place convinced she controlled everything. I felt no satisfaction. I felt sadness. Sadness for someone who confused power with the ability to make others afraid. Outside, footsteps stopped at the door. Colleen Park stood there, holding a plate of baked goods. She did not talk about court dates. She talked about neighbors discussing how to revise the HOA rules. Less paperwork, more conversation, she added, almost as an afterthought. It turns out when the lights come on, people finally see who they have been standing next to. After she left, I turned off the lights and sat quietly in the dark for a few minutes. I remembered being underestimated, being labeled a problem, being seen as a risk. I remembered how I once believed silence meant weakness. Now I knew better. Silence is only a strategy. Real power does not need to be loud. It needs patience. And when the moment comes, it speaks for itself. Outside, the neighborhood settled back into stillness. No sirens. No whispers. Just the sound of wind moving through leaves. I stood up, closed the cellar door, and for the first time in a long while, I slept deeply, without dreams. The trial ended in less than a single morning, but its aftershocks lingered like an underground current. Vanessa Langford sat at the defendant's table, no bright dress, no practiced smile. When the judge read the guilty plea, she bowed her head low, not in remorse, in exhaustion. Exhausted from finally facing what she herself had built. Trespassing, property damage, conspiracy to abuse process, unlawful interference with a veteran's benefits, dry legal words, landing heavy as stone. Outside the courtroom, there was no crowd, no reporters pushing forward, only a few neighbors, standing at a distance, quiet. I saw them look at me, then look down. A few brief nods, late acknowledgments. No apologies were needed. The truth had already done its work. A few weeks later, Hawthorne Crest changed faster than I expected. The HOA board met again, this time without clipboards held high. The rules were rewritten. Fewer vague clauses, more conversation. People began knocking on each other's doors instead of sending fines. The whispered stories about the troubled man disappeared, replaced by ordinary questions. What kind of tomatoes are you growing? Your cellar is really cool. One afternoon, I opened the cellar to a few kids from the neighborhood. They stared at the neatly lined jars like it was a small museum. I showed them how to mark dates, how to check the seals. The cool earth smell spread out, familiar. I realized I was smiling more. Not because I had won, because I had returned to being a normal person. Grant Langford stopped appearing at local meetings. Langford Development Group withdrew its applications. Investors went elsewhere. My land stayed where it was, quiet. No for sale sign. No new fencing. I kept it the way I had kept a promise to my great-grandfather. Not to fight anyone, to stand my ground. Sometimes I asked myself what the real plot twist of this story was. Not that an HOA president was arrested. Not that a project was canceled. But that someone who had been underestimated became the center of the truth. I held no official power, no title, no seat at a table. My power came from patience, from the habit of documenting, from understanding that systems can be abused, but they can also correct themselves when the light is strong enough. As night fell, I sat on the porch, a cool breeze moving through the trees. I thought about the people watching this story from other places, people who had been pushed by HOAs, labeled trouble simply for living a little differently. I thought about the feeling of being backed into a corner and told that silence was the only option. Silence is not weakness. Silence is how you listen long enough to hear what the other side will say next. If there is one thing I learned, it is this. Write everything down. Know your rights. Build alliances. Even if it is just one kind neighbor or one old friend who knows where to place a camera, do not strike first. Let the truth do the work. I closed the cellar door, turned the lock, and heard the metal slide into place. A familiar, solid sound. I knew I would sleep well that night. Not because the neighborhood was perfect, but because when someone tries to turn you into the problem, you now know how to return the question to where it belongs. If you have ever had your own story with an HOA, with a Karen who believes paperwork is absolute power, tell it. Write it down. Share it. Your story might be the light for someone standing in the dark, just as I once did. And if you think stories like this are worth continuing, stay with me, subscribe, and tell me where you are watching from.